Picture this, 1972. Los Angeles is choosing a new patrol car. Two giants step into the ring. Plymouth, which had owned the police market for decades, and Dodge, builder of the fastest cop cars in America. And then there's a third contender, a company so broke that analysts openly doubted it would survive the decade. That company walked away the winner. How? Let's get into it. To understand how big this upset really was, you first need to understand just how hopeless this company looked from the outside. Before we get to the winning, we have to get honest about the losing, because this company lost and lost badly for most of its existence. The company was American Motors Corporation, AMC, and from the moment it was born, that name was basically a synonym for runt in the world of big American car manufacturing. AMC was formed in 1954 out of a merger between two fading old brands, Nash and Hudson. The logic behind the merger was brutally practical, and honestly, a little desperate. Neither one stood a chance against the big three on its own. Together, they at least had a fighting shot at survival. Not a guarantee, just a shot. And here's something worth sitting with for a second. Throughout almost all of American auto history, fourth-tier companies like AMC usually played the same role. They existed right up until the money ran out, and then they quietly disappeared, one after another, barely leaving a footnote. But AMC turned out to be
the exception. Not because it had more money. It never did, not once. But because it was forced to be smarter than its rivals, and more disciplined, too. When you can't afford to build what the giants build, you either die or you find a niche the giants don't care about. There's no third option. And AMC understood that better than almost anyone in the industry. That's exactly how AMC survived for decades. While Ford, GM, and Chrysler split the market for near-identical, safe, forgettable sedans, AMC chased the buyer everyone else ignored. The budget shopper, the value shopper, the person who wanted a car with a little personality instead of just another badge on a hood. By the way, before we go further, don't forget to check out the previous episode. It's linked either in the description or in the end card. It sets up a lot of what we're about to cover here. All right, moving on. That philosophy is exactly what gave America some of the most recognizable and most bizarre cars in its history. The stubby little Gremlin, the awkwardly futuristic Pacer, the compact Hornet. Today, people look back at these cars with a nostalgic smile, almost like old family photos. Do you remember them fondly too? Let me know in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear it. But behind every one of those models was one simple fact. The company simply didn't have the money to play it safe the way the giants did. The weirdness wasn't a marketing gimmick, and it wasn't a bold, creative choice made in some design studio. The weirdness was necessity, plain and simple. But in the early 1970s, that necessity turned into a genuine threat to survival. A wave of new federal regulations hit the industry all at once. Safety standards, emissions rules, required equipment, crash tests that no manufacturer had ever had to deal with before. For GM, Ford, and Chrysler, these were just extra costs that quietly disappeared into their enormous budgets. They barely blinked. For AMC, every single new requirement landed like a hammer blow on the weakest point in the foundation. The company had to pour a disproportionate share of its tiny resources just to keep up and survive, while the giants adapted almost effortlessly and kept right on competing. So let's lock in the picture here, because it matters for everything that comes next. A small company, perpetually on the edge of bankruptcy, known mostly for quirky economy cars, fighting for its life against three genuine industry giants with virtually unlimited resources. This is not the setup for a company that's about to build one of the most recognizable police cars of the decade. This is the setup for a company everyone had already mentally buried, a company that showed up in industry write-ups mostly as a cautionary tale. But as they said, AMC had an ace up its sleeve that almost nobody outside the company was paying attention to, and they'd already proven, quietly, that it worked. AMC knew how to build engines. That's it. That was the whole secret weapon, hiding in plain sight the entire time. Specifically, they built a big, heavy, serious 401 cubic inch V8, an engine with real racing pedigree behind it, not just a big number on a spec sheet. And in 1971, they proved it on track. The AMC Javelin, driven by the legendary Mark Donohue and the Penske racing team, won the Trans Am Championship, one of the most prestigious racing series in America, a series that produced legends like the Camaro Z28 and the Boss Mustang. The little gremlin company, figuratively speaking, beat Ford, beat Chevrolet, beat Chrysler, right there on the track in front of everyone watching, with no excuses and no asterisks. And here's a detail worth pausing on, because it's easy to miss in the middle of a fast-moving story. That Trans Am win wasn't just a nice line in the brand's history. In plain terms, it proved AMC's engineering was not inferior to the Giants. In some ways, it was actually better. The Underdog suddenly had teeth, and the car meant to bring those teeth
to the street was just about to arrive. Its name was the Matador. The Matador debuted in 1971 as AMC's new midsize car, replacing the respected but aging Rebel. It came in 3 body styles: sedan, wagon, and coupe. And in its standard form, it was exactly what you'd expect from a budget manufacturer. Modest, practical, a completely unremarkable family sedan that would blend right into any suburban driveway. But AMC also offered a very different version. A version that was anything but modest, and honestly, not worse than anyone else's on the market. Equip the Matador with a police package and that 401 V8, and this quiet family sedan suddenly turns into something with real muscle under the hood. AMC even briefly turned the Matador into a full-blown muscle car, a version with the Machine Go package featuring an aggressive hood scoop and loud graphics, built in such a limited run, fewer than 70 units, that today it's one of the rarest collectible AMCs in existence, the kind of car that makes collectors do a double take at auctions. Serious performance ambition was baked into this car from day one, long before anyone from LAPD ever looked at it. And it was this very 401 Matador that AMC was preparing to send into battle against the 2 biggest names in American police car history.
To understand why the LAPD's decision actually mattered, you need to understand what the Los Angeles Police Department really was and how it operated behind the scenes. The LAPD was one of the most demanding, most closely scrutinized departments in the country when it came to its fleet. And crucially, they were absolutely ruthless about it. They didn't care about brand loyalty, and they definitely didn't care about sentiment or tradition. They cared about one thing only: performance, measured, tested, and proven. And they switched suppliers without a moment's hesitation whenever the numbers told them to. In 1969, they ran Plymouth Belvederes. In 1970, they tried the Mercury Montego, and officers hated it so much the model lasted exactly 1 year in the fleet before being pulled. In 1971, they went back to Plymouth, essentially admitting the experiment hadn't worked. To everyone watching this who actually lived through that era, I genuinely love to hear your take in the comments, what you remember about those patrol cars on the street. This was a department that tested cars ruthlessly and dropped them without a second thought the moment something better came along. So when the LAPD went shopping again in 1972, this was a real, brutal competition, and the odds were stacked against the newcomer from the very start. According to historians who've studied AMC's police fleet history from that period, the department put the 401 Matador head-to-head against the Plymouth Belvedere, the car that was effectively setting the standard for police work at the time, and ran both cars side by side through identical, exhausting tests. This was a real trial by fire, one the Matador was, by every prediction, supposed to lose badly. AMC had no established reputation in this segment, no developed dealer network, no decades of built-up relationships with law enforcement agencies, the kind of relationships that usually decide these contracts before the testing even begins. They had exactly one advantage: a genuinely good, solidly built car and nothing else to fall back on. And when the test results came in, the LAPD placed a major order. Not with Plymouth, not with Dodge, with the AMC Matador. It genuinely surprised a lot of people in the industry at the time. Let's stop here and actually break down why this happened, because it wasn't luck and it definitely wasn't a cheap price gamble on the department's part. The police spec 401 V8 produced 255 horsepower, and it pushed the mid-size Matador from 0 to 60 in around 7.5 seconds. Genuinely fast for a 1972 patrol car, fast enough to actually do the job on the streets of Los Angeles.
Here's the detail that, in my opinion, holds the real secret behind this win. For the 1972 model year, AMC made a surprisingly humble decision. They swallowed their pride, and instead of forcing buyers to take their own in-house transmission, they installed the proven, rock-solid Chrysler TorqueFlite automatic. At the time, one of the best transmissions in the entire industry, built and refined by a direct rival. On top of that, the Matador used air conditioning suited for genuinely long, hot shifts on the streets of Los Angeles, which mattered far more to a working officer than any spec sheet number. A strong engine, a reliable transmission borrowed from a rival, and a thoughtfully designed, comfortable cabin. Put together, that's not flashy, it's just smart. This wasn't a decision made in favor of the cheap option. This was a decision made in favor of the objectively better car. And multiple sources from that era agree on one thing. The Matador simply outperformed most of the other police cars available on the market at that time. And the people who actually drove it backed that up, day after day, shift after shift. Jerry Bush, an LAPD veteran and one of the department's supervisors, told Hemmings Motor News in a 2005 interview that American engines didn't have much of a reputation back then. But the Matador, he said, was genuinely one of the best in its class, a truly great police car. Fast, with better brakes than the Plymouth, and overall very well suited to the job.
And that last part matters a lot. The Matador wasn't just fast in a straight line, the kind of car that looks impressive on paper but disappoints the moment it's actually used in the field. According to professionals who drove it every single day, the Matador actually outcornered and outmaneuvered the Plymouth police cars it was competing against, which is a much harder thing to fake than raw top speed. Bush's division was so pleased with the car that they made it their official training vehicle, and the department was given a fleet of 18 new units specifically for that purpose. The Underdog had done the impossible. The smallest, most underestimated automaker in America had outmaneuvered the giants of the police car business and landed a contract with one of the most famous law enforcement agencies on the planet. On its own, this is already a great story about the little guy beating the big guys, the kind of story that would make a solid headline and nothing more. But what happened next is what turned the Matador from a smart procurement decision into something an entire generation would remember decades later. Because the LAPD's new patrol car was about to get something that no amount of money can buy.
A starring role on national television. In September 1972, one of America's most popular police dramas kicked off its 5th season, Adam 12, a half-hour procedural drama following 2 LAPD officers through their daily work on the streets of Los Angeles. It was one of the defining cop shows of its era, watched by millions every single week, and the creators prided themselves on authenticity above almost everything else. Real LAPD procedures, real radio codes, real LAPD vehicles, right down to the smallest detail. So when the department switched to the Matador, the show switched right along with it, without hesitation. From 1972 to 1975, the black and white patrol car driven by officers Malloy and Reed, episode after episode, was the AMC Matador. And this wasn't just a Matador sitting quietly in the background. The full police spec version appeared on screen, complete with the real 401 V8 and those distinctive 401 badges right on the front fenders, broadcast for the entire country to see, week after week, for years. Here's the moment I really want to slow down on, because I think it says everything about how this story actually landed culturally. For millions of Americans who had never set foot in Los Angeles and never once saw a real LAPD patrol car in person, this specific Matador was what the LAPD looked like.
Not an abstract idea, not something they pictured vaguely in their heads. A specific car right there on their television screen every single week for 3 straight years.
According to one automotive historian, the Matador was quite possibly the most recognizable LAPD vehicle for the entire run of the show. The Underdog's car became the visual shorthand for police on television, and it belonged to a company the industry had already written off as good as dead. And Adam 12 was just the beginning of this run. Once the Matador became a recognizable police silhouette, it started showing up everywhere in 1970s film and television, almost as a kind of shorthand for authority itself. It appeared in Adam 12's spin-off, Emergency. It showed up in the Rockford Files, in The Incredible Hulk, in The Dukes of Hazzard, and later in Cannonball Run. A redesigned Matador coupe even landed a role in the 1974 James Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun, and, in true Bond fashion, dramatically flew through the air on screen for a genuinely memorable stunt. And since this channel always tries to dig for the real story behind the story, fun fact, that flying stunt was actually shot using a scaled-down radio-controlled model, not the real car. A small detail, but it's a fun reminder that even Hollywood's stunt team decided this modest little car from a struggling company deserved a real movie moment.
And here, in my opinion, is a genuinely strange and beautiful paradox worth pointing out before we move on. A car from the smallest, poorest automaker in America, practically a homemade product by industry standards, became one of the most frequently filmed cars of an entire decade, appearing in more shows and movies than some far wealthier manufacturers ever managed. And there's one more thread that ties all of this together, one that a lot of people miss. While the Matador was appearing on television, it was also proving itself on the racetrack, exactly as AMC's secret weapon had promised all along. The company entered the Matador in NASCAR, alongside Penske Racing, and this was a serious, fully committed effort, not a marketing stunt tacked onto a TV deal. Mark Donohue gave AMC its first NASCAR win at Riverside in 1973, a genuine milestone for the whole company. And here's a detail that connects
Directly back to what that LAPD instructor said about the brakes. A coincidence I personally think is one of the most beautiful in this entire story. Donohue's winning Matador used disc brakes, a genuine novelty in NASCAR at the time. The very same car whose brakes officers praised as superior to the Plymouths on city streets was literally setting new braking standards on the racetrack at the exact same time.
Bobby Allison then took the baton and turned the Matador into a true champion, closing out the program with a win at Darlington in 1975 in the Southern 500, one of the most prestigious races on the entire calendar. That victory came just weeks after Mark Donohue's death in a racing accident in Europe, which makes it a bittersweet milestone, and it remained AMC's last Southern 500 win for more than 40 years afterward. Over the course of a few seasons, the program brought AMC 5 NASCAR wins in total. So the same Matador that was patrolling the streets on TV every week was also winning on Saturdays at the track, living two completely different lives at once. On screen, on the track, and on the patrol car door, the Matador was genuinely everywhere for a few truly remarkable years, a run of visibility that almost nobody at AMC could have predicted. But time, as usually happens in Underdog stories, was not on AMC's side for very long. In 1974, the Matador went through a redesign, and the new coupe got a radical love-it-or-hate-it look that never connected with the public the way the company had hoped it would. The sedans got bigger and heavier, and no amount of TV fame could fix AMC's core problem. There still simply wasn't enough money to compete with the giants long-term.
And here's a small personal observation worth sitting with. TV popularity and commercial success turned out to be two very different things, and this story proves it clearly. The Matador stayed small, stayed underfunded, and stayed burdened with higher relative production costs than the giants ever had to worry about. On-screen fame never translated into the showroom sales the company was genuinely counting on to survive. The rest of AMC's story is the classic sad ending of an underdog tale. The company kept losing ground through the rest of the 70s, the Matador survived on life support through an alliance with Francis Renault, and by 1988, the AMC name itself disappeared entirely, absorbed by one of the very giants it had fought against its whole life.
But that ending is exactly what makes the Matador's moment of triumph shine even brighter in hindsight. For a few years in the early 70s, the smallest, most underestimated automaker in America did something nobody expected. It built a police car good enough to fairly beat Plymouth and Dodge for a contract with one of the most famous police departments on Earth. And then it watched that car become a genuine television
icon, recognized by millions of people who never even knew the company's name. That was AMC's finest hour, and it belonged entirely to the Underdog in the first place.
So the next time you stumble across an old episode of Adam 12 and spot that black and white sedan with the 401 badge on the front fender, take a closer look. That's not a Ford. That's not a Dodge. That's a car from a company that, by every rule of the industry, was never supposed to build it in the first place. An underdog that once beat the giants at their own game, fair and square. This is a story about 401 badges and stubbornness, a story the industry almost forgot to tell. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement genuinely helps this channel grow. Don't forget to check out the video in the end card. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.